from NJ.com. This is Talk is Cheap, a New York Giants podcast. We're talking Big Blue football all year round.
Welcome on in, Giants fans, to episode 98 of Talk is Cheap, our New York Giants podcast right here on NJ.com. I'm Joe Giglio, joined as always by James Cratch and Dan Duggan. They cover the Giants for NJ Advanced Media. Episode 98, meaning we are 2 episodes away from the big one, from number 100, our live episode. We're going to be doing it at Red's Restaurant in Carlstadt, Monday, August 28th. We want all of you guys to come out. Jonathan Casillas is going to be there with us, doing the show, taking your questions. We're going to have the pair of tickets, actually 2 pairs of tickets, to give away to Giants games this year. So we're really looking forward to that. A couple more podcasts until then, but number 100 will be out live at Red's Restaurant. And hopefully, James, by then, as the preseason will have winded down and we'll be looking to the regular season, hopefully by then we'll have maybe something positive to say about the Giants offensive line. Something will have sorted itself out, because off of that first preseason game, you guys were there at MetLife on Friday against the Steelers. It feels like Groundhog Day, James. The same conversation, different year. Though this year with this team, there's bigger expectations that a bad offensive line could derail.
Joe, look, we might as well cut to the chase. I think there has to be a serious concern with Giants fans, with the Giants, that this offensive line, we had a whole offseason of all this happy talk and this improvement. Look, it's just the preseason. As the Giants will remind you, they don't really game plan in the preseason. But at some point, this offensive line has to show improvement. There has to be clear, tangible evidence that progress is being made. And you didn't see it on Friday night, really. And I just am wondering, at what point are people just going to say the line is what it is and it's not going to get better? And then the question's going to have to become, can the Giants contend for a Super Bowl with the group as is?
Yeah, it's a worry. It has to be. And if you watch that game, even a little bit of it, you saw it, especially early on. Dan, the offensive line right now, it's the biggest concern around the Giants. And Ereck Flowers tends to be the biggest concern among the unit there of that offensive line. It feels like he's just not progressing quickly enough for the Giants to feel comfortable there.
Yeah, and before we actually get into Flowers, I'm sure we'll dive a lot deeper into him. If you look back at Friday night, though, I think the biggest problem was the inside guys, and mostly Richburg and John Jerry. I mean, the tackles really weren't getting beat, around the edge. The second team tackles were. I mean, that was kind of eye-opening for Chad Wheeler and Adam Bisnawadi. Anyone thinks they're ready to push for a starting job, I think that was a little bit of a wake-up call. But on the first team offensive line, the sacks were either a combination of Josh Johnson holding the ball forever and a day, or some pressure up the middle, especially Weston Richburg. He had a really rough night. I think he's a guy who's kind of flown under the radar, and everyone's worried about extending him. He needs to show something this year, because he took a big step back last season, but he also kind of got a pass because it came out after the year that he had torn tendons, I believe, in his wrist in the preseason. So he played with that all season. So that was like, oh, okay, that's why he took the step back most likely. And maybe it was, but the evidence on Friday night was not great that he's going to turn it back around, because he really struggled. Pass plays and run plays, he was getting pushed into the backfield. I mean, they could not run the ball at all. I think that's almost more of a concern than the sacks, because, again, a lot of that was Josh Johnson holding onto the ball forever. Now, you can easily say that with Eli there and Odell Beckham and Brandon Marshall and Sterling Shepard, all these guys, when they're playing, teams won't be able to tee off on the run. But still, it just feels like excuse-making like we had all last summer. Oh, don't worry. Once the game starts, it's going to change. And it obviously never did. And the fact that the same 5 guys are back, I've been saying this all offseason, the expectation that they're going to suddenly flip a switch and be so much better, I'm skeptical. And nothing Friday night changed that viewpoint. But it is early, and we'll see how they go. These next 2 preseason games will be really telling. And, of course, nothing really matters till the regular season starts. But if you're looking for optimism, I've been saying all along, it felt like blind hope during the offseason. Oh, guys are working harder, as if that's the difference between a bad tackle and a Pro Bowl tackle is just work ethic. I always felt that was blind hope, and really nothing I've seen this summer has suggested that this offensive line is going to be any noticeable amount better.
Yeah, it's hard to say that. And off of the first game, off of what you guys have reported and talked about at training camp, it feels like the same old story. James, when you look at what happened on Friday night against the Steelers, Dan was mentioning the interior there. I think it is easy to point to Flowers, and I did it to start the show, but if Flowers isn't the only concern, if they have more concerns in there, or the rest of that unit isn't good to maybe cover up a little bit of what he is, That's a problem because I don't think they could survive if they have 2 or 3 spots there that are shaky.
Definitely. And I think Dan hit on the nail on the head. Richburg is the guy that you really have to wonder, what is up with him? Because I look at right guard. I mean, look, the Giants knew what they were getting with John Jerry when they brought him back. And another thing, and we'll see how Dan thinks about this, I have not seen anything this summer through 3 weeks of training camp and the first preseason game that leads me to believe that DJ Fluker has a serious chance to win a starting job from John Jerry, from Bobby Hart, from anyone. It seems very clear that the Giants view him as a backup, and he might be their best backup. He might be the sixth man on the offensive line. But there's a big difference between being the first guy in and actually being a starter. And it doesn't seem like they're giving Fluker any real shot to win a job because, frankly, I don't think that he's shown enough to even deserve having a chance to win a job. So I think Jerry's going to be the right guard. He had a solid season last year. I think that he's kind of going to be what he is, and the Giants knew what he was going into the year. Richburg's the guy who I think Dan's right. You got to last year he got a pass with a hand injury. I will say I thought he got better as the season progressed. But Friday night was not good. I understand they had a nose tackle on him. And again, they might say that, if we game plan during the regular season, we'll do some things differently. And it kind of comes back to what we'll talk with Flowers. It's the NFL. I mean, you're starting offensive lineman. You're paid a lot of money to block the guy in front of you. And at some point, he's just going to have to do that. And if he doesn't do it, then you're right. Beyond Flowers and Bobby Hart, the Giants are going to have more problems. And look, that unit has to be, always talk about it, the unit has to be good as a whole. But if you have multiple issues on that 5-man line, you're going to have a lot of issues elsewhere.
Yeah, I'll just jump in on Fluker, and then we can definitely get to Flowers, which I'm sure is going to be a longer conversation. But like James said, again, it happens in every sport, every team, every fan base, every organization. In the offseason, everything is great. Like DJ Fluker, former first-round pick, they got him. Oh, man, he's going to step right in. There's a reason why the San Diego Chargers, or Los Angeles Chargers now, drafted him in the first round 4 years ago, picked up his fifth-year option, and then tore it up and just said, see you later, before he even got to that fifth season. That doesn't happen to good players. I mean, now listen, I'm not saying he's a bad player, and maybe if someone goes down, he steps in and is better than, who you might have had, an Adam Geddes or a Brett Jones. Maybe. But the idea all offseason that he's going to come in and overtake Bobby Hart, overtake John Jerry, I mean, it was a realistic expectation maybe that he would push Hart, but they clearly view him as a guard. He really hasn't taken very many snaps at right tackle, and even the ones he has been on the third team, so it seems almost more just to make sure he knows the plays in case he does have to, step in there in a game situation. But it's easy to get carried away with, he was a first-round pick, and he's huge, and he's so excited to be here. Well, there's 4 years on tape. We saw the offensive line market explode this offseason, and yet DJ Fluker was available for a 1-year deal with $1.5 million guaranteed. You have to keep that type of thing in perspective. The Giants front office is not that much smarter than the rest of the league, or vice versa. The rest of the league isn't that dumb that they just missed this, six monster that was a first-round pick, and they didn't realize, DJ Fluker's available. So those expectations should have been more tempered. Not that he's looked terrible this summer. He's looked up and down. He's looked like a guy who, sort of like Ereck Flowers, was a first-round pick, has never lived up to it, and the Giants may be in the same situation with Flowers a few years down the road where they might walk away from a first-round pick the same way the Chargers did. So I just think that it's hard to keep that type of thing in perspective in April and May when everything's excitement. But now that the kind of rubbers hit the road, you're realizing that DJ Fluker is what he is. And all along he was brought in as a backup because as soon as they signed him, they brought John Jerry back for more money. So it made it pretty much clear where their plans were there.
Yeah, if that's the depth, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of depth there. It doesn't feel like there's a guy that, usually the backup quarterback, we always joke about that as the most popular guy. I can't imagine many are going to be chanting for DJ Fluker to come in if there's a problem, but there's not much there. And James, at tackle, Ereck Flowers, the story of last year, the story of this offseason, the story of training camp so far, how much better can he get? And is his performance directly going to tie to everything else in this offense? And we know how important the left tackle is, especially with a quarterback like Eli Manning, who's not mobile at all. I mean, they need to block for Eli to give him a chance. And it just feels like Flowers, every time anyone talks about him, it's never in a, he's about to turn the corner type of light. I never hear that.
No, and I think, look, Flowers, there have been moments this training camp where he's looked improved. No doubt about it. And he did play pretty well in the preseason game against the Steelers. I think Pro Football Focus, no sacks allowed, no pressures allowed. That being said, the last few days at practice, not so much – we're taping this on a Wednesday, not so much Tuesday, but Sunday and Monday have been really rough. I'm sure Giants fans have seen the videos out there. It's not been good. And I think at some point there has to be a legitimate concern of, on the whole, I don't feel that he's necessarily – he's taken some steps forward and he's taken those steps right back. And I just haven't really seen anything that makes me believe that this whole summer, spring of faith and all this training and he's lean. I just don't – it doesn't – so far there have been no fruits of the labor that the Giants say he put in the offseason. And that has to be a major, significant concern. Maybe the Giants aren't panicking yet, but we're getting to that point.
And they have to be. I mean, this is their left tackle, one they spent a high pick on a few years ago. And, Dan, I'm looking at the schedule now in front of me, and look, I don't think any team can survive if they have a bad offensive line. But the Giants this year in particular have a schedule that has a whole bunch of good pass rushing teams. I mean, you have the division, pretty much the strength of those defenses is on the defensive line. You have the AFC West, which has Joey Bosa and Von Miller. You have Seattle. You have Aaron Donald in Los Angeles. I mean, the Giants, if they don't block this year, are going to be struggling in almost every single game, not just because it's important, because they're going against really good defensive lines.
Right, and that's why I found it kind of laughable when McAdoo after Monday's practice said he thought the offensive line played well, when I think anybody watched that practice would not come away with that conclusion. But he's clearly, he knows that unit gets beaten down, so he's certainly trying to build them up a little bit. But then he was asked yesterday, now that you had a chance to go back and watch the film, what did you think of Flowers' performance? So he can't just sit up there and lie and say, I thought he was great. But he went with this nice spin of, I thought Olivier Vernon brought his A game. I mean, that's great. Olivier Vernon is a very good defensive end, one of the best defensive ends in the league. But as you alluded to, every team has premier pass rushers for the most part. I mean, and when you look at this Giants schedule, it is just about every team. So it's not as if he's going to, have all these tough practices against Vernon in training camp, but then get to the season, it's going to be a cakewalk. I mean, because like you said, then Joey Bosa is coming and Melvin Ingram, and I know guys line up on different sides, but, Von Miller will probably draw him at some point, and he's not going to be any letdown after facing Vernon in practice. So it was a nice spin, nice attempt there by McAdoo. The thing that strikes me about McAdoo, and he openly admits it, that he treats players differently. His line is, I'm consistent. I treat every player differently. And there's definitely some merit to that. Certain guys handle certain things differently and can handle public criticism. Other guys can't. But he just bends over so far backwards to never criticize the offensive line, and Flowers in particular, that I would think at some point, if you're another player on the team who's, had a jab thrown at you publicly, the one that stands out is Paul Perkins, who very rarely has any running room. But the one time he had some running room in the preseason opener, he got 7 yards. And McAdoo said, that can't be a 7-yard run. He has to make the safety miss or run him over. And really it was kind of pointed criticism about one play that Perkins made. And yet there's, mountains of film of Flowers getting beat like a drum, and there he gets a mention. And if anything, gets excused, and it wasn't so one-sided, or Vernon brought his A game. And I'm just thinking, if I'm Paul Perkins, I'm sitting there, coach, like, what about that guy? I mean, he's the guy who's getting people's stuff back in the backfield. I have no reason to run, and you don't ever criticize him, and then I don't get a 20-yard run, and instead I only get 7, and I get criticized. So that's just kind of an aside, but it stands out to me. It's interesting how much the kid gloves treatment this organization gives to Flowers, and I think it's because they haven't given themselves any choice. I mean, had they brought in a veteran tackle, and not necessarily an Andrew Whitworth, that would have been my, number one priority this offseason. But even just, a veteran who has some starting experience who could have pushed Flowers, I still think that would have done worlds for him. Because if he beat that player out, whoever you want to say it is, just any veteran offensive tackle that was available on the scrap heap, even if he just beat that player out, you would say he earned it, and he was, kind of put to task. But it's just the fact that he just kind of was handed the job. I feel like the organization has to support it because they're the ones who didn't make any moves, and it just doesn't feel like they pushed him enough. And now you're really looking at a situation where there's no backup plan. If he comes out and is as bad as he was last season again, where do they turn? And you hear so much talk, oh, well, they have these different players. They added Red Ellison. I mean, he's not a 6th offensive lineman. Red Ellison's a good blocker. I think he's going to help more in the run game. But, I mean, if he's a tight end on the field and you're going to keep him in to help Ereck Flowers every play, you're just taking a receiver out of the route. So that can't be the solution to just, we'll just put Red Ellison next to left tackle every play. So it's on Flowers to play better. As James said, there just hasn't been much evidence this summer that he's going to be significantly better. Maybe he marginally improves. Maybe that's enough. I mean, hey, they did win 11 games with him as a left tackle last year, but clearly that wasn't because of the offense. So I just feel like we're back at the same point we were when they left the field in Green Bay, that he was the biggest weakness on the team. They did a lot of things this offseason, but they didn't address that. So if there's an Achilles heel and you want to look for one, that's the obvious place to start.
A couple things what Dan said. One, I just want to this tweet I saw. Jeff Howe, Dan knows him well, covers the Patriots for the Boston Herald. The Patriots having joint practices with the Texans in West Virginia this week. And he had a tweet yesterday, Marcus Cannon, and look, obviously Marcus Cannon is a better left tackle than Ereck Flowers. I don't think anyone's disputing that. He owned J.J. Watt yesterday in practice, and I would argue that J.J. Watt is a better player than Olivier Vernon. So it is possible for a left tackle to handle a star pass rusher in a practice setting. And the other thing is, it's not just Olivier Vernon that Flowers has struggled with. He's been beat, and people have seen film by Kerry Wynn, by JPP, by Devin Taylor. He had Romeo Okwara in a chokehold the other day I saw during a passing drill. I mean, it's not just OV. And this whole idea that, it's all excuse, the excuse time has to be over for Ereck Flowers. He was the number 9 overall pick. And look, we can sit here all day and argue whether or not he should have been a number 9 overall pick. And if this all doesn't work out in the end, it's on Jerry Reese more than it's on Ereck Flowers, no doubt. But he's number 9 overall pick. They chose him to be the franchise left tackle. It's his 3rd year. He's been starting for 2 years. He's got his feet wet. It's time to go. And the Giants, Dan's right. They've kind of set themselves up in this situation where there's no real wiggle room. This is going to be boom or bust, in my opinion. If they had said last year, okay, Flowers really struggled, we need to bring someone in to compete with him, or we need to change his position, then I think they would have a chance to kind of work through it, maybe salvage everything. But the way I look at it now is, if Flowers doesn't make major strides this year, I don't see how the Giants can put him at left tackle next year. And then Dan's right about DJ Fluker. I don't know if there's much of a future for Ereck Flowers with the Giants, because I feel like if you have 3 bombed years at left tackle, are you going to pick up that 5th-year option, which is a heck of a lot more money for a number 9 overall pick than I think Fluker, who I believe was 23 or somewhere in the 20s. So yeah, it's just, you're really kind of treading on dangerous waters here, I think, with Flowers, both for the team's on-field success this year and his future, his career going forward. But the bottom line is, he's got to play better. Excuse time is over. I don't care if it's Olivier Vernon, if it's anyone. He's got to be competitive against these guys, because if he's not, there's a lot of pass rushers coming this year, and it could get ugly.
So what do they do, Dan? I mean, we're all sitting here kind of shrugging our shoulders. It feels like the Giants are shrugging their shoulders. Is there a chance they go out and make a move for something before the season, whether it's a depth piece that you feel better about, and if they do have to make a move, they could put this guy in? Or is this what it is, that the Giants are going to go into this season and cross their fingers and hope things change?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is what it is. It's funny. Anytime a veteran tackle hits the market, I have a million people hit me up immediately on Twitter. You think the Giants are going to look at him? And obviously you look into it, but pretty much my stock answer now is, well, they haven't yet. So why are they suddenly going to change and try and go after this guy? They seem all in on Flowers. It would be tough at this point now if you were going to bring somebody in, because again, talking about a guy who has kind of a fragile mentality, you've made him the starter all season, then all off season, then all of a sudden, like 3 weeks into camp, you're going to bring in competition. That would be a tough thing. And obviously the caliber of players that would become available at this point, not going to be very strong. I mean, remember they signed Will Beatty, right before the season last year, and he barely even dressed for games. So the guys that are going to be available at this point, I don't think it'd be worth it, because you are so invested in Flowers. You believe that he will turn the corner. At this point, you have to ride it out. I mean, there are ways that they can try to work around it. It is a quick strike offense. They do have more weapons. As much as I kind of poo-pooed the Ellison thing, I mean, they will need to help more, even if it's just chip blocks from the backs or keep a tight end more often than they did last year. They have to adjust to what they did. Last year they stuck with the same thing, as I mentioned many times, over and over and over again. I mean, this offense shouldn't be completely undone, by Flowers' struggles, because you still do have some great weapons. The problem is at that position, one or two breakdowns a game can change the game. You can either get your quarterback injured, which is the worst case scenario, but a blindside hit much more likely to lead to a fumble, or you can knock the ball from the air for an interception, all sorts of different things like that. So that's the concern, and that's the problem with Flowers too. Is when he gets beat in these clips, it's like Vernon's running around a cone. I mean, there's no resistance. That's the bigger problem. Like Bobby Hart at right tackle is not going to make the Pro Bowl this year, but he doesn't stand out practice in, practice out by just getting completely abused by JPP. I mean, granted, there's definitely times where he has a rough practice or he has a rough snap, but at least there's some resistance put up. Sometimes Vernon goes around Flowers like he's not even there, and that's the part that's really scary. I mean, we saw that a few times last year. I mean, the Dallas game at home sticks out where Manning just got crushed in the back because Flowers didn't even get a hand on the defensive end. So that's really where he can derail the offense, because, again, people say, oh, it's only one or two snaps. You got to keep in mind, in practice, they only throw the ball with the full team, first-team offense out there, maybe 15 times. So if he has 3 bad snaps in that, you extrapolate that over a full game, that's scary. So it's definitely a concern. Like I said, I don't think it's enough to completely derail the offense, because they were able to win 11 games last year. But it's by far the biggest concern they have. And as I keep saying, I just don't see really a solution they have lined up if he is as bad as he was the last 2 years.
Two things. One, I agree with Dan. There's really no one to bring in at this point. And two, if the Giants signed any left tackle today, all hell would break loose. I mean, 90% of the fan base would want that guy to be the starting left tackle from day one. And if that guy comes in and looks good, I mean, the Giants seem to have gone out of their way to be all in on Flowers, and they haven't really brought in any legitimate competition for him. And I just don't see the Giants suddenly, when things are when there's a big spotlight on this situation, thinking, as Dan said, Ben never criticizes the offensive line publicly, really, especially Flowers. But you're going to bring in, Brandon Albert or someone else. I mean, that's not – I can't imagine that would really help the the whole dynamic of the situation. And back to Bobby Hart, the one thing I think the Giants can be optimistic about is that I do think that Bobby Hart has shown progress this summer, and I think that there is a good chance that he might be an improved player who's a serviceable right tackle. And that would be a big success for the Giants. I mean, he was a 7th-round pick. And I do think, look, he's not going to be a Pro Bowler. I don't think he's going to be a standout. He's going to have his bad games, his bad snaps. But I've seen more progress from Hart this summer than I've seen from Flowers. And that has to concern the Giants. They have to be happy with what they've gotten from Hart, but also at the same time thinking, well, why aren't we getting this from Ereck?
Of course. I mean, that's got to be. I mean, one guy is progressing, the other guy isn't. It makes the other guy stand out. The one that isn't progressing does stand out. All right, before we get to some thoughts you guys have on the game other than the offensive line and where this team is right now, one last thing I wanted to ask Dan on this is sometimes when there's one unit of a team or one player that's holding everybody back, everyone knows it. We talk about it, and I'm sure the players know it. Do you sense there's anything yet inside that Giants locker room that is worried about the offensive line, or this could become a constant, I don't want to say distraction, but a question that everyone has to be talked about, everyone has to be asked about during the season? Do you think we're there yet? Do you think we might get there?
No, because again, they did win 11 games last year, and as is often the case, winning kind of cures everything in sports. Because I can remember a few times last year, when the defense just repeatedly bailed out the offense, and you'd kind of talk to some defensive players, and they never once on or off the record point the finger at the offense. That's a credit to them. The locker room really was tight last year. I mean, the only guy I think who would probably maybe have the most issues is Eli, because he's the one who's, the recipient of a missed block. He's the one who takes the brunt of that, and he obviously never, throws a teammate under the bus. So no, I think that's one thing they have going for them, that there really hasn't been any of that finger pointing. I mean, they obviously can't be blind to the fact that it is, a pretty big weakness. But the fact that they were able to win games last year, I think it prevented it from becoming a major issue. I mean, if this team ever, really struggles and the offense is killing the team and the defense can't bail them out, I think you might see it then. But I don't think we expect to see that happen just because the defense is so good, and they do have enough weapons on offense that they should be able to weather the storm a little bit of having a leaky offensive line. But that's something to monitor, I guess. But the good news is for them last year that they were able to avoid that, so there's really no reason. It doesn't feel like it's bubbling under the surface or anything this year.
James, let's jump to some good things here, or some different things outside the offensive line. We had the first game against the Steelers. Give me a couple takeaways other than this offensive line and the story it's become.
The defense looked great, picked up right where it left off. I think that the Giants, there's a lot of concern coming into the preseason about the cornerback depth. I think, the preseason game and in practices, Michael Hunter, I think they found a solid number 4 cornerback. I think that fifth cornerback still a little bit of an issue, but again, I think the fifth cornerback is kind of low on the totem pole of, as long as you have the fourth guy, which you need, because we saw last year, Eli Apple, Janoris Jenkins, Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie all missed some time due to injury. I think they found that. I think that the pass rushing situation, there's a chance it's going to be much improved. You've got Devin Taylor, Romeo Okwara, Kerry Wynn. These guys are making a push. They're hopefully getting to a point where they're not going to have JPP and OV on the field for 90+% of the snaps. Linebacker situation, I think obviously the injuries right now are a little bit of a concern, but Calvin Munson and Curtis Grant, two kind of unheralded under the radar guys, have been having good camps, and I think they're mostly special teams players, but they've also flashed when they've gotten some first team opportunities, some second team opportunities in camp as well. So that's my big positive. I think the defense is still going to be at one of those top 10, top 5 units, and that's going to help them kind of overcome a lot, I think, if they have issues with the offense again. I think Red Ellison's another positive mark. Obviously, he was brought in for his blocking. He's impressed me this summer with his ability as a pass catcher, and I think that he might end up being more of a weapon than anyone ever expected. So that's my positive stuff. Obviously, the backup quarterback situation, not great, but I do think that you saw if Davis Webb wasn't terribly, sharp statistically on Friday night, it looks like it's, like Ben McAdoo like to say, it's not too big for him. He's definitely got the whole poise thing down. He was in command. He broke the huddle. He was in command of the huddle, which, as we learned from the Jets, isn't exactly a given. And I think that, you saw some good things out of him. So those are some positives I take away from Friday night. What
stood out to you, Dan?
I guess let me start with the negative and kind of follow our conversation with the line. They better protect Eli because backup quarterbacks was an adventure. I mean, Josh Johnson just did not. He looked like a quarterback who has not thrown a pass in a regular season game since 2011. And the funny thing is, he's bounced back a little bit in camp. So maybe it was just a lot of rust he had to knock off because he actually had a good preseason last year with the Ravens. But yeah, just did not look good. Geno Smith looked a lot better. I mean, he looked like a quarterback who was a second-round pick at one point in time. But the turnovers, I mean, he threw one interception, had another interception where he kind of got bailed out where there was a hold away from the play. And then it has had a rough week in practice, if you've been following along those reports. I mean, first time we've seen Ben McAdoo make a player run a lap, and it was Geno put him over the edge with fumbles on consecutive plays, backed up around their own goal line. So not the greatest way to build on whatever momentum he had on Friday night. In the running game, another concern, like I said, Paul Perkins really had nowhere to run other than that 1 7-yard run. I thought Orleans Darkwa was clearly the best back. I mean, he only had 3 carries, but picked up 18 yards and just kind of does what he always does, which is hit the hole hard, get what's blocked and a little bit more because he'll fall forward. So that was, a little silver lining in the running game because, again, there wasn't a heck of a lot of room to run for anybody. I thought Shane Smith, the fullback, went a long way towards, maybe not claiming a roster spot early for that, but putting himself a little bit more in that picture because, this offense desperately needed some help in the run game. And Shane Smith, I talked to him this week, and he said when, they were recruiting him, as an undrafted free agent, they said, we really felt like a fullback was the missing piece. Now, maybe they just said that to get him to sign, and they feel like, well, at the end of the day, they can put Red Ellis in the backfield, and he can handle those snaps. But Shane Smith showed a lot. I mean, he was really physical coming through the hole. He was the lead blocker on the 4th and 1 conversion for the starting offense. He made a nice catch and looked athletic. I mean, he just kind of did all the things you need to see out of a fullback and also play special teams, which is really going to be his path to a roster spot. So that was a bright spot. Other than that, not a lot on offense that really jumped out. Even some of the guys who got in late probably looked the best. Some of the young wide receivers like Jerome Lane, he's really kind of come on in camp. Not a guy who's going to make the roster, I wouldn't expect, but a guy to keep in mind for the practice squad. And like James said, defensively, it was exactly what we wanted to see from the first team offense. If I remember the order right, it was first team defense, 3-and-out, interception, something like that. So I mean, you can't really do much better. Kind of picked up where they left off. That's exactly what you expect to see from them. Landon Collins looks like he's in defensive player of the year form already. B.J. Goodson looked good in the middle of the defense. Jay Bromley showed up, and that kind of followed what he's done in camp. So pretty much everything on the defense was positive, and that's obviously what you'd expect from this unit.
So now you guys take a trip to Cleveland. Monday Night Football. James, we were talking about this right before we hopped on to record this. The schedule is strange. I looked at it right before we started to record just to kind of put the timeline of dates in my mind. And you guys have the rest of this week and then no game over the weekend. And then Monday night, and what is it? You have 3 games in like 10 or 11 days?
Yeah, I think it's 3 games in 11 days. So they play Cleveland on Monday Night Football, Jets, Snoopy Bowl 7, I believe, which I'm sure we'll talk about it next week's podcast, but it should be maybe the greatest Snoopy Bowl of all time, the most anticipated one for sure. And then they'll have go up to Foxborough that Thursday for the final preseason game. Then they'll have cuts, and before you know it, it'll be week 1, and the Giants will be getting ready to go down to Dallas. It kind of has flown by, and it's going to start really flying by. But yeah, it's a challenge. Ben McAdoo has been he's kind of embraced it publicly, at least, this 3 games and 11-day schedule. I think it's going to be interesting to see how. I mean, he's never really going to say much, but how they kind of balance playing time and everything, especially for the starters with that kind of condensed schedule. But it's going to be a kind of a mad dash to the end of the preseason for the Giants, and then they'll be on to Dallas.
On to Dallas, probably without Ezekiel Elliott. We'll see how that appeal goes and what goes on down there. I'm sure we'll have a lot to say about that as we preview the season. Dan, as always, thanks for doing this. And a couple more. We'll see everybody out at Reds in Carlstadt. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, less than 2 weeks away. It's going to be fun.
Episode 100, Reds Restaurant in Carlstadt, Monday, August 28th. Come out. We'll be doing this show live. Jonathan Casillas will be there. We'll have tickets to give away to Giants games this year. James, it's going to be a lot of fun. Enjoy Cleveland, and we'll see you at Reds in a couple weeks.
You got it, Joe. Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for listening to episode 98 of Talk is Cheap right here on NJ.com.